Hey everyone. So Google continued its efforts to be the broiest member of the tech broligarchy. On Wednesday, they actually announced they wouldn't be sponsoring this year's Pride Festival in Sydney. And not to be undone, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta announced that they would also not be sponsoring this year's Pride Festival. What's up, everyone? I'm Steven Renderos from Media Justice, and we need to talk about why these tech bros want DEI to DIE. Welcome to WTF, the download. This live stream is your 30-minute, no BS breakdown of tech industry moves that might have flown a little under the radar. Every live stream, I'll be joined by a friend to help me break down this tech news, minus some of the corporate spin. And this is part of a larger political education series that Media Justice is currently running right now called WTF, The Rise of the Tech Broligarchy. Every 2 weeks, we are doing a webinar to talk about what tech is doing over the first 100 days of the Trump administration. On the screen, you'll see a QR code, so go ahead and scan it and register for the full series. The next one will happen on March 5th, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, let me frame up a little bit of today's topic. Um, this news this week follows a pretty monumental staff meeting that Google held last week, where they walked back two very big key commitments. The first was a pledge like to not build artificial intelligence for weapons and surveillance. And actually, like recent reporting has demonstrated that they weren't even abiding by that commitment to begin with. And the second thing they walked back was a pledge around diversity and inclusion goals. This is everything from like hiring goals, training programs designed to create opportunities for underrepresented communities, activities to make Google employees and even its users feel much more represented. On top of, if you look at many of your Google apps, you'll see that they've been de-woked a bit. They've removed Black History Month and Pride from Google calendars. If you pop open your Google Maps, you will notice that the Gulf of Mexico is now renamed the Gulf of America, thanks to a Trump executive order in the first week of his administration. And Apple Maps did the same thing. So all the tech bros are doing this. Of course, like with Google, we're talking about a company who like its history is to say like is the slogan is like don't be evil, right? And I kind of wonder in this moment in time, it probably feels like they should drop the don't from that slogan. Here to help me make some sense of this conversation and this topic, I want to introduce my guest and friend of Team Media Justice, Bridget Todd, who is the creator and host of iHeartRadio's award-winning tech podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet, which explores the intersection of technology and identity. And Bridget is also the research fellow at Harvard University's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. At Harvard, she's going to be exploring how identity-based misinformation and disinformation proliferates in the podcast and audio space. Bridget, it's so good to have you here. How you doing?
Oh my God, thank you for having me. I am excited to talk about what is happening with this broligarchy. Also, side note, what a great term. What a useful term.
Yeah, we didn't create it, but it is out there and we're going to use it. But Bridget, so this rollback comes right as Trump returns to office. Do you think that Google is doing all of this now because they're trying to curry favor with a new administration? Or do you think that this is just something that they've been wanting to do for a while?
This is an interesting question. I honestly think it's both.
Yeah.
When we first started seeing a lot of these tech companies roll back things like DEI and really sort of quickly align with the Trump administration, I thought like, oh, this is a real mask off moment for these companies. But I kind of no longer think that. I think that there is no mask with these companies. I think that tech leaders who run big tech companies a lot of times just don't really have a spine or like strong values. And so I think whoever or whatever is currently in power, that's who they will align with. These companies are not companies run by people who have actual values. And so I think that we're seeing that play out in the quickness with which they have aligned with this new administration. I also think that some of these companies kind of see their companies as places where they might stand to benefit from a climate where their staff and their rank and file workers don't feel valued or heard or respected, because workers who feel valued and workers who feel heard or respected might also be workers who are more comfortable expressing opinions, right? Or like having
Hmm.
say about the technology they build. And so I think a climate like the climate that the new administration is fostering, where they're kind of de-wokeifying things a little bit, as you said. I think that the leaders who run these companies are like, oh, if that makes people feel less comfortable speaking up about the technology that they're helping us build, even better.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this is, tech companies are known for being the place that like sort of innovated kind of a different model for creating workplaces, right? That like centered workers, they fed their workers. They created these open office spaces where people could just like be constantly in a creative environment, collaborating with each other, like took down like the cubicles and walls. So it's a very disruptive force like in workplace culture and very much centered workers at the heart of it. Um, and yeah, like the chicken's coming home to roost when you empower workers. They will have stuff to say about the business that they're helping to build. Um, and it's interesting. I think like it makes me think a lot about some of the work that I know we've overlapped around with platform accountability work over the years. And there was a period in time, I think, where public interest groups, civil rights organizations, racial justice organizations, um, had a real influence in shaping what these companies did. And much of what we saw with like DEI initiatives, hiring initiatives, in large part was like the result of our work in pressuring these institutions to represent more of the people that live in this country. Um, I was listening to an interview that Marcus Andreessen did. He's this big like VC investor in Silicon Valley, and he was doing an interview with the New York Times with this like conservative op-ed columnist, and he was talking about the turning point with tech workers happening around the rise of like Bernie's campaign. Back in when was that 2016,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing a lot of people within tech like flowing to become Bernie bros on top of being tech bros, and seeing that as like almost a violation because Bernie represented a very anti-capitalist candidate. And so to some degree with this question, I do think that it's probably a longer time coming that these companies have been trying to roll back the power that they have ceded to workers. And Trump, I think, comes at a very convenient time where it allows them to accelerate that transition.
Oh, absolutely. And I think so. I mean, I think about this all the time. I go back to where I personally was sort of in the early days of the rise of some of these tech companies. At this, I am sad to say this. They had me totally fooled, right? When I was a
Mhm.
bit younger, when I kind of knew a lot less about what was really happening, I used to think tech companies are going to save us, right? Like I really was somebody who was optimistic and really, because of this core optimism that I think I was sort of like naively buying, I really gave a lot of these companies much more latitude than I should have. I'm correcting that now, but I think that politically, culturally, socially, we have all sort of done that. We have created this dynamic where, we just assume that these companies and the people that run them are going to be invested in creating the kind of world that we all want to live in. And now those chickens are coming home to roost, where it's like, well, gee, we gave all of these people all this social, cultural, and political and financial power over all of our lives in these like incredibly invasive and intimate ways. And they're using it to further exploit us and get rich off of it. And while they are doing it, they want to be seen as like luminaries. They want us to be willing, voluntary, happy participants in our own exploitation. And I mean, I really have to like kind of see the ways that I gave these people so much latitude because it seemed like they were doing something interesting and exciting. I think workers who were, swayed to come to these companies because they made it seem like they were places where open-mindedness, inclusion, creativity were values that they wanted to actually, retain, as opposed to things they wanted to squish out of you by creating a climate and fear around things like layoffs. Like, I really do think that we're sort of contending with some of the cultural attitudes that we let run rampant around big tech today in 2025 as we're in this moment with the new administration.
Yeah, I really appreciate you naming that. I think it's a big reason why Media Justice spent the last couple of years like reworking our strategy. That was one of the things that like we came to was a realization that like much of how we were trying to make change happen when it came to technology, um, that change led to victories that weren't always durable because of the structure of these companies, because of the shifting profit motives of these companies. Um, and we woke up to the reality that our understanding of what could change within these companies was different if we weren't really focusing on where power was being concentrated. And what we have now, is a massive concentration of wealth, a an oligarchy in the traditional sense, where these bros will wield their social, their political, their economic power in order to advance their own interests. So let's talk a little bit about that. So killing DEI, it really has a primary motivation around money, right? And one of the, I think, places I wanted to kind of explore a little bit with you was around military contracts. The Verge actually very recently reported that Google's cloud team had stepped up its collaboration with Israel's army, during its siege of Gaza. And this is like despite significant resistance from workers, on through groups like No Tech for Apartheid. In that staff meeting that I was referencing earlier at the beginning of this, there were 93 questions from staff about weapons development and about kind of like AI with the military. There were also 100 questions about DEI. These are like the two top questions inside of Google among Google employees were about those two things. And so I'm curious, like, how do you think this plays out at Google? It's a company where it seems like the gap between what the leadership wants and what it's pursuing as its business interests and what the workers want is so stark. So, how do you think this plays out for them?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. I think all of this is happening on a climate where there's been tons of layoffs. People are economically concerned, rightly so. And so I think Google. I think these things are linked in that I could see a future where Google is like, oh, if staff is worried about their jobs, if staff is seeing people get cut left and right, that's actually good for us because that is a more disempowered staff, and that is a climate where they might think like, oh, we can recruit folks who frankly will do whatever we want without having any kind of a say or a voice. And so I think like the thing that is really getting me in this moment is I hope that these rank and file staffers at big companies really do understand that they have power. There is definitely more of them than there are executives and tech leaders making these decisions. And so I think Google and tech leaders and the people who run these companies want these rank and file staffers to feel like, oh, I can't speak up, I can't protest, I need this job. If I lose this job, I can't find another one. And I deeply, deeply understand and identify and empathize with that feeling. But I think that's a feeling that like they have created to create this feeling of scarcity so they can just recruit people who will just do whatever they want.
Yeah, that's 100% right on. I mean, and I think pursuing these military contracts are very like super lucrative. Like, I think that's something that to really understand. There's about like Google has a $9 billion deal with the Pentagon, probably millions in upon billions of dollars more in military contracts with other countries across the country, particularly authoritarian ones that want to leverage that infrastructure for harm. Um, you know, and yeah, I think it's part of like this trend I'm seeing. Last year Microsoft CEO said like diversity is no longer business critical, but the stuff that is like how to really leverage this technology to advance the interest of governments, even if those interests are about hurting people. And I am curious to what degree um, workers inside of these companies are willing to come together and resist. And I think that's where I've been really inspired by the work of No Tech for Apartheid. It's like
Oh,
workers
totally.
like literally putting themselves on the line. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and it's like I would be remiss to not talk about the ways that like so much of what we know about what big tech is doing and the ways that they are not aligning with the values that they publicly will hold, the way that they are building technology that we know criminalizes people of color globally, that hurts people, is because of staffers, whistleblowers internally who were like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up to work on like death tech, right? Like there has been such an amazing history and legacy of folks within these companies speaking up. I think the people who run these companies are incredibly threatened by that power because it is so powerful. So like I just want to lift that up, that like that there we do have that legacy, and that legacy has been so powerful at actually I won't even say creating change, just letting the public know or letting the public in on what is actually going on at these companies.
That's right. So another shout out for the No Tech for Apartheid folks, Tech Workers Coalition. There's a group called Amazon Workers for Climate Justice. These are all groups of like workers that have come together to agitate the company around things that matter to them, even beyond just the like material, what's my salary, what are my working conditions. They're really interested in like what the company is doing and how can it live up to, how can its rhetoric match its actions. Um, Speaking of which, I think one thing I'm curious to tease out with you is the contradiction of a company like Google that says and has long been known as this place where we are the company that don't be evil. That is our motto. That is what we do, right? And yet, um, we're in this moment now where many like Google execs are saying like we have to, our values are still our values, but we have to comply with legal directives. And so how can this motto of like don't be evil coexist with business interests that at times has you supporting authoritarians, apartheid, genocide even? I think it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but I'm curious just your thoughts on like this contradiction we're seeing in companies like Google, especially.
Yeah. Oof. Well, I should say Google did officially drop the "Don't be evil" part of their slogan in 2018. I don't know if they replaced it with something of like "a little evil is fine for a treat" or
Little is
something.
okay.
But yeah, I mean, I listen. I would not be doing this work if I did not believe in a future where tech companies could figure out a way to both make money and not advance things like authoritarianism, genocide, apartheid. I believe that like that is a future that is possible. There are companies who are doing it today, right? I think that what we're seeing with some of these companies is just making a choice. There are so many private companies that did not immediately turn heel as soon as the Trump administration put out those EOs, walking back things like DEI. Plenty of Costco's in the news for being like, actually, we're going to keep our DEI. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
But like, that's a choice, right? Certainly, the Trump administration did not force Google's hand to remove things like Black History Month or Pride Month or Women's History Month from their calendars, right? That was a choice. And so I think we have to be I think we have to be honest about, and we have to demand honesty in the way that these tech companies talk about the choices that they have made, because they're just that, choices. Nobody's forcing their hand. They are making choices to be the kind of company that they are being.
Yeah, that's right on. And I think what it makes me think about is other contradictions that I'm noticing, even in companies like Google, because I think we're going to see more of it. We're going to see rhetoric not necessarily match up with action. And you're right, like that rhetoric and your ability to act in a particular way, that is a choice. And with Google, I think one place where I'm noticing that it's going to start happening more and more is around its climate commitments. Same thing with Amazon. The big race towards AI, like a big motivating factor for many of these tech companies is to build up the infrastructure that allows for them to compete around artificial intelligence. And, so tech companies like Google are actually building like massive data centers all over the country.
Yeah.
Um, and they need energy, they need water and electricity to actually run them. And that's creating a contradiction because many of these companies have made very, very strong commitments towards being as green as possible and kind of mitigating their carbon footprint. And these data centers pose a real contradiction to those commitments. And you're starting to see Google, for example, buying up, mini nuclear reactors in order to power their data centers. They're shirking back their commitments to using like renewable energy to power certain like data centers. And so So yeah, that's just another place where I'm seeing like a contradiction, and I think climate will be one where it's going to be the starkest with some of these tech companies. I'm not sure what else you're seeing.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I actually happen to live near, I think, the highest concentration of data centers in the United States in Northern Virginia.
Oh, that's
Uh,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like it, I mean, that's the thing is like, I guess I keep going back to how I felt a few years ago. And I wish that we didn't allow these companies to position themselves as leaders when it came to things like climate. Uh, because that would like they're not leaders, they're the opposite of leaders, right? Like I wish I wish that we did not spend all this time kind of like patting these companies on the back for like, oh yeah, they're really championing green energy or blah blah blah, because it was just lip service. And so I guess if we're talking about this like mask off moment, at least I'm happy that we don't have to pretend that these companies are doing the right thing anymore. We don't have to give them all this good PR for them like taking the right stances when they're just not. Like at least we can just like see what these companies are doing and the people who run them, what they're doing with clear eyes, and have a much more honest conversation about it. Like that's like the one silver lining of all this, I think.
That's right. They're showing us who they are, and I think the big lesson I'm taking away is let's not be surprised by the moves they're making. Their motivations for what they do have always been the same, and that's to secure more profit. Um, as we get ready to wrap up, I guess I wanted to ask you just a little bit about the work that you're doing as a research fellow. How's that going? And, if you're willing to share a little bit about what you're learning about the disinformation ecosystem,
Ooh.
particularly in this podcast space, because I feel like it's so relevant to this conversation.
Oh, can I swear?
Can we? Yeah, you go for it.
When it comes to the spread of inflammatory mis and disinformation in the podcast space, we're fucked, right? Like it's
Right.
bad. If you were to go on to Apple Podcasts and look at the top 10 or even top 50 podcasts, it's all liars, hucksters, grifters, racists, sexist. It's like the worst of the worst, right? It's
Mm.
bad. And I think that for my work with Harvard, what I'm seeing right now is how it's this interesting duality where at one, people sort of still look down on podcasting and audio as a medium that matters. And hucksters have been able to use that like lack of scrutiny to really amass a lot of power. And I would argue it's like one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why we have Trump in office right now is podcasters and the way that we treat that landscape as a place that's like, you don't really need to pay attention to what's happening there. And then that allows these hucksters to quietly amass so much political, financial, and cultural power. So it's scary. However, I will say, like, the reason why I'm a podcaster and the reason why I care about what happens in that space is that it is so powerful. So the same hucksters that are harnessing the power of the podcast space for bad, I think that we can have more and more voices who are harnessing that same power for good, for truth, for the accurate content and healthy digital ecosystem that we all deserve, that media justice is really helping to build.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Um, and I appreciate the shout out for our work. And yeah, I was really sitting, I mean, I've always been so thoroughly grateful that you exist in this media ecosystem. Because frankly, like when it comes to talking about tech and you go to tech podcasts, like it is people of a very particular ilk, it's like it's your white men and Kara Swisher. So it's like it's that, and I think you've held a really necessary corner in the public discussion around technology, and so I'm really grateful, and I can only imagine what that's meant for you to put yourself out there, to be holding that space, and to be creating space for other people to be speaking and sharing a more diverse perspective on this technology, and it couldn't come at a more incredibly important time. I was right there with you watching like the evening of the elections and Trump's kind of like speech declaring victory. The shout outs that happened in the very earliest moments were to the Manosphere podcasters, like streamers, etc., the Aiden Rosses, the like Joe Rogans. Um, and so it's very real. It's not theoretical. These guys actually, these men actually helped to get this guy into office, and we're in an ecosystem where their influence is significant, but it's not inevitable. Um, so, closing us out, Bridget, how can people plug in with you?
Oh, well, you can listen to my podcast on iHeartRadio called There Are No Girls on the Internet. You can find it wherever you get your podcast on. And you can follow me. I know we have been talking about big tech, but you can follow me on social media.
On
I'm
all
a,
the big tech platforms.
I know. I'm on Instagram at Bridget Marie in DC, and we'd love to have you there.
Thank you so much for joining me, Bridget. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much for the space. This has been awesome.
Right on. Well, that is our live stream here today, WTF the download. Just to recap something that I'm really going to be taking away from this conversation. We shouldn't be surprised by the moves that these tech companies make, many of which will be probably stepping back from commitments that they've made to communities that look like us, that think like us, that value the things that we value. The primary motivation behind many of the actions that these tech companies and many of the members of the oligarchy are motivated by is to increase profit. So we shouldn't be surprised if in this moment with the Trump administration that they are choosing to appeal to this administration in order to secure their place and secure their wealth. That is what we learned in episode 1 of WTF, the rise of the tech oligarchy. So just to plug it again, this is part of like an ongoing political education series. If you're wanting to learn what is an oligarchy, what is this tech oligarchy up to, what's happening with the TikTok ban, what the hell is the deal with like artificial intelligence, all of those topics and more are going to be explored inside of this political education webinar. The QR code is on the screen. You can pop open your phone. That will take you to a page to register for the Zoom. And we are going to be excited to see you there. The next topic on hand is WTF is the tech oligarchy up to? So we're going to go dig a little bit deeper to like some of the members of this oligarchy and what they're doing right now. So I can preview a little bit. One of the members of this oligarchy, unsurprisingly, is Elon Musk, and he's been playing a very strategic role inside of the federal government. And his actions have led to a purging of federal workers. You've probably seen the headlines with IRS workers being laid off, members of workers from the the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau being let go, seeing USAID, this like department that gives out resources globally to groups on the front lines of democracy. Those folks are being defunded, and many of the workers there are being laid off. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into like what he's up to, as well as other members of the oligarchy. The next session is coming up Wednesday, March 5th. So go to the QR code, register, and join this political education series. Um, and remember, don't let them gaslight you about this moment. They are choosing profit over people. Thank you for joining WTF to download. We'll see you soon. Peace.